My name is Dorian Reed, and I will be reviewing, listening, and responding to problems and evaluating your own actions as part of our Mentoring 101 series. As we're listening and responding to problems that our mentees bring to us, it's really important for us to truly listen and be receptive to what we are hearing, especially as it pertains to any problematic behaviors that the mentees may be experiencing as they go on this journey. If they're bringing to us concerns that they have about conversations that may have been insensitive or um, inherently problematic, we as the mentor are tasked with listening to them openly um, rather than being defensive and really giving a keen ear and providing insight um, in a non-biased way. We don't want to trivialize what they're saying. We want them to feel like they're truly being heard in a respectful manner. And we certainly don't want to defend any problematic behavior that they're reporting to us. A good example of this would be if our mentee has been orienting or shadowing with a particular provider, for example, they bring to us a concern they have about a conversation around a patient that may have been a minority patient, or a comment may have been made that was insensitive, perhaps even negative in a racial way. We, as the mentor, have to listen, understand, and as has been said previously, listen to the entire story without interrupting. Approach the story that the mentee is telling us with an attitude of belief and acceptance, and examine how we would want to respond, and also how we would feel in their position if we were feeling invalidated or dismissed by our mentor versus feeling trusted and heard as a colleague. It is our duty as mentors to first listen, um, and making our mentee feel supported. Second, only after listening and understanding the entire story and hearing their perspective. And it's important, again, I can't emphasize enough to have that acceptance and empathy when we're listening to this story. So say you've done all this, you've done this all the right way. What now? After you listen to the story, how do you show up for that mentee after you've heard their experience? Well, obviously, as I've alluded to in the previous slide, we want to treat our mentee like a trustworthy colleague. And it's important for us to really reflect on what that means. That means that we're listening to them as we would someone who we work with and trust on a daily basis. And so we believe inherently that the story they're telling us is in fact authentic. We don't want to play devil's advocate. We don't want to say, well, I'm sure provider X that you were mentoring with or that you were shadowing with meant well, and surely he or she didn't mean anything negative by this comment. We want to really support that mentee and make them feel believed so that they trust in us as well. Similarly, we don't want to give the offender or the person that has made the negative comment the benefit of the doubt. Again, we have to be very careful, especially as we were not there when this was said or this interaction took place. And our role is to be in support of the mentee. We don't want to be dismissive when we're speaking with the mentee. We want to make sure that we are using language that is supportive, and again, not making them feel diminished in any way or that we're glossing over the experience that they had. The other pitfall that we sometimes fall into is as we want to, our natural inclination may be to defend another provider. Um, We don't, again, know their intentions because we were not there in the interaction, but we want to really avoid the pitfall of trying to defend the uh, the offender's intentions or quote unquote niceness. So saying, well, I know that, provider X is usually a really, really nice guy. And so surely he could not possibly meant to say something that was derogatory or overtly racist, etc. So those are the ways that we are giving our mentee our trust. They trust us, we trust them, and we develop a very strong relationship in that way. So it becomes a little stickier when we are in fact the offender. We ourselves, as we are human, and will sometimes say things that we may not even realize were offensive or insensitive. We want our mentee to be able to come to us and say, "Hey, by the way, last week, you made this comment that was insensitive." We want them to feel comfortable doing that with us, even if we're the ones. We want to acknowledge our own feelings when that happens. So we will expect to feel some anger, maybe some guilt. We may feel uncomfortable, and we may even be embarrassed that we made a comment that was not appropriate. But we want to remember that the fact that our mentee is bringing this to us shows a level of trust and vulnerability on their part. So we want to be grateful that they trusted us enough to share that with us. We want to listen respectfully, as we've said previously. We want to listen to the entirety of what they have to say first, and then reflect on why the behavior that we participated in was problematic. We want to thank them. We want to apologize. We want to be sincere in that apology. We want to vow that we're going to do better, that we're going to avoid the same kind of problematic behavior we displayed in the future with them and other mentees and in our clinical and personal lives. We want to then act on that. We want to actually avoid the problematic behavior in the future. And we want to call it out in other people. If we see it, we want to say something. And that's how we truly not only show up for our mentees, but also show up for our colleagues and friends as well. And then the final part of this is, now we've listened to our mentee, we've sort of accepted and counseled them and helped them in any way we can. What's the next step? Okay, we've listened to what they had to say, we've acknowledged, we've reflected, and now what do we do? So now we have to respond and support. So what we don't want to do, which is a common pitfall as well, especially if a mentor is feeling unprepared or unequipped to really meet the specific needs of that mentee. So, for example, the mentee may feel that part of what they need for support is a specific group that they want to join to maybe discuss with other students of color who may be undergoing similar experiences as they go through their shadowing in their schooling. So, we may not, as the mentor, know of a specific resource, and it may be easy for us to say, well, I don't really know, but I'll ask my colleague who's also BIPOC, who may have better resources, or they may just say, you know what, I'm just going to send you over to my colleague because, he or she may be better equipped to answer this or deal with this specific issue. We don't want to do that. We don't want to deflect that. We don't want to dismiss the mentee onto someone else. We really want to commit to providing that support ourselves to the best of our ability. We've listened to their problem, And we now want to ask them, what kind of support do you need from me? And really get specific answers from them about what they would like you to do. So it's very clear what kind of support they need from you and what you can provide. And then you're going to provide whatever support you can. And even offer additional resources. So again, to go back to a BIPOC or URM support group that they may need for additional resources, or maybe even a school-specific financial or academic advisor that they may need. You may not have that information offhand, but you can direct them in the right direction for that. And again, just to reiterate, we want to avoid that trap of deferring support or advice because we can't directly identify with the problem that they're dealing with. And this may be particularly true of maybe a mentor who may not be from the same minority group or may not be from the same socioeconomic status as that mentee. But we really want to deal with these issues head on, even though they might be a little uncomfortable for us. That's the commitment that we're making to our mentees. So now we've talked about listening and responding to problems. And while that is extremely important, a very real and important aspect of this as well is also evaluating our own actions. In a lot of this section, we'll talk about something that we did review in session 2 in our small groups, which is microaggressions. And you'll see as we go through these slides that really understanding, taking a deep dive into microaggressions and what they mean is a bit key to evaluating how we show up for our mentors or for our mentees as well, excuse me. So to review, this will be very familiar to everyone as we've done some of this work in our session 2 in our small groups. But let's go back and review microaggressions and really go through the general definition and also break down into some subcategories of microaggressions as well. So microaggressions, what are they? In brief, they're sort of the small commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, environmental indignities, which are intentional or unintentional, and they can communicate hostile, derogatory, negative racial, gender, sexual orientation, and religious slights and insults to a target person or group. These are actually subdivided quite commonly into 3 categories of microaggressions. So there's micro-invalidation as one, micro-assault as another, and micro-insults as the third. And these are typically the 3 categories that you will see as people talk about microaggressions. So some examples of things that we see here daily that are examples of microaggressions, and we hear these a lot, unfortunately, and I think most of us become sort of almost immune to these things as we hear them so frequently. Here's some examples. Where are you really from? Can I touch your hair? You speak excellent English. You're in America, so speak English. All lives matter. Can you teach me how to twerk? Saying that to, assuming someone of color. This is really something that as we are going through our day-to-day lives, something we don't want to gloss over, because these are the root of what microaggressions are, and just some great hard examples of that. Some other things that are specific to medicine that we in healthcare may see, particularly those of us who are PAs, ARNPs, physicians, may have heard some of these things if we are of color or women. Do you speak English? Nurse, can you find me a doctor, even though you're clearly the provider or doctor? Are there any doctors from America here? If you're someone who's of color or of from another country, sometimes patients hear an accent and they go down that path. And those are examples of microaggressions that we hear daily in healthcare. So going back into the three different types of microaggressions. So there's the micro insult. This is an example here at the top of a Black male college student at a highly selective university asked what sport he plays, with the underlying assumption that he didn't gain admission based on his academic credentials, but rather his athletic ability. Another example is a Latina administrator who is described as spicy, quote unquote, which culturally and sexually objectifies her, and it diminishes her effectiveness as a leader when others hear this. That's a micro, so those are micro insults. Micro invalidation, this is a great example. So an Asian American professor is asked where she's from, and then when she replies Kansas, her student responds, no, really, what country are you from? Suggesting that she's not born in the United States. So that's an example of a micro invalidation. And third, microassault is a more direct microaggression, form of microaggression. And the example that's given here is a Muslim student who sits in a class where a professor makes Islamophobic comments during his lecture. So that's a much more direct form of microaggression. So let's go back even a little bit deeper. So when we were talking about micro insult, remember on the previous slide, we were sort of talking about that, um, um, sports, the sports comment about the student, and what sport he plays, assuming that he didn't get where he got based on his academic acumen. So typically, these micro insults are based on stereotypes and prejudice that are widely out there and really so pervasive that they almost are just an accepted, you know, um, um, part of our society, and a lot of times they're unintentionally discriminatory. They serve to alienate or diminish the person that they're directed at, though, and they often the offender may consider what they're saying actually a compliment. So, for example, telling a BIPOC clinician, and I've heard this many times myself, "Oh, your people must be so proud that you made it this far." Well, that's a loaded sentence, right? I mean, there's many assumptions that are made in that sentence, the biggest or most glaring of which is my people, quote unquote, assumingly Black people or African American people, must be proud that I've made it this far, because not many African American or Black people make it to become a doctor or surgeon, etc. So that one sentence is just rife with many problematic thought processes and comments. And so, but that's a great example of a micro insult that maybe many people may have heard, many people of color may have heard along their journey. Micro invalidation is one that probably is the most common and pervasive and often really ignored. So essentially, we had the example in one of the previous slides, but it really ignores and invalidates the reality of BIPOC people, and it's really insidious. So one example would be, saying to a mentee who is, again, as we've talked about, confiding in you, trusting you to bring forward a problematic interaction or comment that was made by one of their providers they were shadowing, let's say. So they say, I just wanted to bring to you and get your opinion about this provider and this interaction I had. And if your response is, well, Dr. X is really nice, or, are you sure he meant to say something racist? Maybe you just misinterpreted what he said. That right there is a micro invalidation. You have not given this mentee the benefit of the doubt. You have essentially assumed from the beginning um, that you're kind of defending the offender, so to speak, which is sort of the opposite of what we've been discussing in these two sections. It's dismissive, it's harmful, um, and so that's an example of something that we could certainly fall into that trap. So we want to be really careful to listen for microaggressions. You have to listen for them because they can be insidious, they can be nuanced and subtle, and we can easily miss them. Listen for them in other people. We have to be attuned to ourselves as well, and when we say certain things, and sort of really be brave enough to evaluate what we're saying, and then calling them out, both in other people and ourselves. Help our colleagues by referring them to resources that teach them about microaggressions as well. There's lots of articles and data information online that we could use as a resource for our colleagues to help them learn and give them some tools as well. Micro assaults, wrapping this up, is one of the last slides. So these are a little bit less common. These are really explicit racial comments, or really any kind of derogatory comments that's verbal or nonverbal, and it could be intended to do harm or maybe not. And a common micro assault is a racist joke that someone makes that it's clearly bigoted, but they may say, "Oh, I'm just joking," so that makes it okay, kind of thing. Or imitating a person from another country's accent, or using outdated racial terminology like Negro or Hispanic, which are terms that are very loaded in a lot of negative history, and are not current. Those are all considered micro assaults as well. So I found this to be a really good, helpful sort of way. I know we always use acronyms these days, and I think CARES is a really good way when you're thinking about, hey, I think I just was a perpetrator of a microaggression, or I just was on the receiving end of a microaggression, or I heard a colleague who may have said something that I think is a microaggression. You want to be an ally that cares. So C stands for consider how what was done was harmful. A is being accountable for your actions and willing to apologize. R is rethinking harmful assumptions or stereotypes. E is empathizing with those on the receiving end of microaggressions. And S is supporting by offering those resources and asking how you can be of help. So that is, in essence, that CARES encapsulates these last two sections, or at least this last section that we've been discussing about evaluating our own actions. And I think it's really important even to print this out and have this somewhere to remind you of that as you're working with your mentees. Be true to your mentees. This is crucial. So we want to be authentic. We don't want to virtue signal or partake in performative allyship. And what that means is, we're out putting on blast that we're doing all this good work, and, we're on social media posting all these things about um, just basically, how we are being a great support to BIPOC students, et cetera, but we're not really living up to that. We're not really living up to the hype that we're putting out there. So know that is not authentic. So being authentic means you are walking the walk and as you're talking the talk. Know your mentorship style and align that with the right mentee. There's a questionnaire that's linked here in the presentation. That's the UC Davis Mentoring Style Survey. It's really helpful to see that your style of mentoring is whether you're more into hand holding and really being more hands-on with the mentee versus being more hands-off. You really want to make sure you're aligned with mentees that are similar in style. I think that's the best relationship. Provide constructive feedback that's thoughtful and respectful, and being mindful of tone and nuance, again, is really important, and following through as well. Finally, helping your mentees combat and overcome imposter syndrome. It's something that we didn't cover really in this section, but in the coming sections, you're going to get some more information about imposter syndrome. What is it? And how our mentees may be experiencing that. So that's it for me. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to go through this important information with you. And the next section will be Instilling Confidence, which will be presented by Catherine Delestrinos.